Welcome back to Conversations with Thought Leaders. I'm Andrea Sampson, the CEO and founder of Talk Boutique. And we're back after a bit of a summer hiatus, and I am so excited today. Not only do I have my cat joining me, but I do have a very special guest, somebody I've known for a few years, who I've worked with, who I've seen grow and step into thought leadership that is really changing our world. Dr. John Mitchell is the president and CEO of IPC. He's an author and a leading expert on solving global workforce issues. He's a big picture thinker who routinely works with global leaders and from more than 3,000 companies worldwide. Now, you may not have heard of IPC, but I'm going to guarantee you that in the next little while, you're going to hear a lot from Dr. John Mitchell. He's made it his mission to bring innovation and original systems and frameworks to hiring, developing, and retaining talent. He has a keynote where he shares his inspiring stories of companies and organizations who've adapted to fundamental workforce changes by focusing on what matters most, the humans within those systems. Now, the work that John and I have done together, we have really delved deeply into the human side of our workforce and what it will mean with AI in the future when we are working side by side with teammates who may not be human. Whether you are a seasoned CEO or a workplace neophyte, John can help you build a successful workplace in this rapidly changing landscape. He's going to share some actionable insights and practical, implementable solutions with us today. And we're going to go deep. We're going to go all over the place because I know every time John and I have a conversation, it starts in one place, it ends in another, and in between, we've sometimes solved some of the world's biggest problems. So you're in for a treat today. John, I am so excited to have you with us.
Thank you, Andrea. It's great to be here, and your comments are always just too kind.
Well, John, I'm excited because I know a lot about IPC, and probably our listeners may not. But I know that IPC is actually the Global Electronics Association, and you are sort of thinking more globally about what we do with electronics, why these things are important to us. And one of the things that I know. That many of our listeners may be thinking is electronics. Like, it seems like something we haven't talked about in a million years. I mean, with whether we look at AI or quantum computing or even the advanced level that our cell phones are at these days, is electronics still relevant? Is it something we should even be thinking about?
It's a great question. So the short answer is, which I will not leave you with just the short answer, absolutely.
But you have to say that anyway.
Exactly. Yeah. But electronics are everywhere. They're necessary for all of the things you mentioned. AI does not happen without electronics. Your cell phone is a piece of electronics. When you get in a plane, in a car, most of your vehicle now, most of the content in your vehicle is electronically driven. The plane systems that are flying it, that what you're utilizing as you interact, even in professions that you may not think of it, agriculture, electronics, teaching, electronics are finding their way into literally every single vertical in the world. So, you've titled this session, Electronics, the Most Powerful Resource. I love that because electronics are, I like to think about it in this way. If you take, you have the 7 natural wonders of the world, and then you have the 7 man-made, wonders of the world. Just like we have, natural resources like water or fossil fuels, electronics are the new resource. They are the man-made resource to the man-made wonders of the world. It's necessary for everything. If you're going to be successful, you have to have a plan on how to leverage and utilize electronics.
Well, one of the things that I hear a lot about, and I think, and I know you and I have had these conversations, is electronics are something that, as ubiquitous as they are, because they have become in our world something that we rely heavily upon. Um, they're also the thing that we are throwing away. They're replaceable. I mean, it seems like every piece of technology that we have is something that at some point we replace with a new version. I mean, the new iPhone just came out. I know I'm already going, oh, is it time for me to upgrade to that? And what do I do with this powerful tool that I've got in my pocket? It seems to be a waste. Is that like, what's your thoughts on that?
So there is an increased effort by the electronics industry to enhance their sustainability efforts across all types of product lines. Now, it's a challenge, as you pointed out. The factories themselves are doing great work in trying to manufacture things cleaner. I mean, I love some of the fascinating stories that have been shared with me where, water coming into the plant is actually dirtier than the water that leaves plants now because
Wow.
of the processing that goes through in the scrutiny. So the electronics industry is doing a great job in terms of trying to manage those resources. There's still more work to do, but they've been working on this for literally decades and continue to do so. On the other side of it, it's kind of challenging that in terms of the product piece. You mentioned the iPhone. So when a new version comes out, right now, iPhone is making very strong strides. One of the biggest strides that happened last year was they went to a common connector. The EU said, hey, we're only going to do USB-C, people. None of the, so we can try to unify connectors so we can have a little bit more sustainability of that. They've adopted that. That's great. But in terms of the ecosystem of recyclability, it's very, very immature right now. In terms of designing for reuse or recyclability or, ways to reclaim your electronics, those systems are still very immature and somewhat ineffective. And so we have to work as nations, as a world, to improve and standardize those systems so that the electronics organizations can design things to be utilized in those systems. Until those exist, it's very ad hoc and very difficult.
Let's do a little bit of future gazing and go like, what could it be? One of the things I remember many years ago, first hearing the term form factor, right? Like that, especially when we look at electronics, like, do we really need to replace everything? Or, we're in a world where there's software and I remember this when Tesla first introduced its vehicles. That was one of its selling points, was that it could literally upgrade your car overnight with just a software upgrade because it's electronic, because it
Yep.
has the ability, right? Whereas, we're not talking about the hardware that's running it. That often stays the same. It's the things that it can do. Is like, as you look to the future of electronics, are you seeing us move to a place where we're buying form factors and really we keep those for the long run, and it's software upgrades or some form of an upgrade, or is it something else?
So let me use an example from my past to point to the future, because the past is often indicative, but not always. So I used to work in the automotive sector. And when I was building infotainment systems into vehicles, the system we built while I was at Bose for auto manufacturers, we nicknamed the kitchen sink because it had everything in it but the kitchen sink. I mean, we wanted this, we wanted that capability, because you don't know what everybody's going to want. And in the automotive life cycle, you start planning approximately 4 to 5 years before the car comes out. And think about your electronics 5 years ago and versus today. And that capability is a big challenge. And so we faced this challenge, and it was a real struggle because you spec and have to price and buy and make sure it meets all the requirements years before you're going to be launching, so that by the time you launch, it could feel antiquated.
Mm-hmm.
One of the solutions that has come out in the automotive space, you'll see, like Apple or CarPlay and Android, auto that work there. So now the device can stay updated, but the form factor, okay, my screen and some of the connectors and the sensors in the car, I can just work with those. And so
Right.
we were able to update the brain. And even in today's electronics, you talk about Tesla, how they're able to do the software upgrades. This is happening in all kinds of places. If you would have, think back to, let's go back to Windows 3.1, right?
God. You and I remember that, John.
Oh, sorry. Yeah, I'm showing my age. But when I started doing IT way back when, that's what we were trying to lay out. And it was very manual. It was, oh, I've got a new piece of hardware in here. Well, where do I find the driver? How do I upload that? How do I plug and get that in there? Now, you plug in a new device and it goes and configures it for you. And most of the time, 95+% of the time, it's working. And that's fantastic. So we are doing using those kinds of intelligences in many, dare I say, most of the electronic systems that exist. Now, there are systems out there that are older and antiquated. Some of the big challenges are like in space. So at IPC is the trade association for the global electronics industry, as you mentioned. And we produce standards that people build electronics to and design electronics to. We provide education that allows people to actually use those standards and to have the right skills to build electronics. And then we work with governments to solve, challenges across the industry, because it's a global industry. No matter how you cut it, there's no one country that can do everything. So sometimes you put things out there like, in space that have to last for 20, 30 years. And how do you maintain that? And that is a challenge that we continue to work on. And there's great innovative people at NASA and other space programs around the world that are working to do that. But we have to maintain standards that are 20 years old just because of that. Because what if you have a piece you have to replace? Well, you need to know how it was built, 20 years ago. So it's a complex problem. I wish it was simple. Of course, then I probably wouldn't have a job.
Yeah. But I mean, I love what you're saying, which is, look, we can't predict the future without first understanding the past, right? And so we've got to recognize that we live in a complex world full of electronics that truthfully didn't exist 100 years ago. And so
didn't even exist 50 years ago.
Yeah, like we're in this place where everything we know and take for granted today has happened in the past 50 years. And in those 50 years, the upgrades have been really quite phenomenal and exponential in nature. I mean, when we look at, when I think about when I got my very first cell phone, it would have been in 1994. And, it was in the days of the Nokia it looked like a cordless phone. I mean, I didn't have the original luggable. I was not that far back, but
I played with those.
Yeah, but I did have the handset, the Nokia handset. And, today, so 1994 is 30 years ago, which is crazy to me.
Hard to hear.
Oh my God. But in 30 years, we've gone from really a dumb terminal. That's what it was. It was just
literally just a phone. Boop, boop,
just
boop,
a phone.
and that was it.
To having, a computer that is so powerful that we could literally run, world systems on our cell phones. And so, 30 short years, that's incredible. That's that's one generation, really. And so this is an exponential world we're living in. And you're also, I mean, not only are you the head of the electronics associations globally, but you're also a workforce expert. And, as you start looking and putting your brain to the problems that companies are facing today in terms of technology and the way in which technology is impacting the work they do, the people who work with that technology, and the way that technology will become workmates in the future. What are you seeing? How are you and the company you work for helping us to get better at that?
Yeah, it's a great question. Thank you. So first thing that I see or hear a lot about is fear. Okay. I mean, think about ChatGPT 2 years ago. Nobody had ever even heard of it. And yet it is driving itself into every nook and cranny of our lives successfully and to much benefit for us. Many people are worried, oh, will there be a job for humans in the future? And as you mentioned in the intro, the answer to that is absolutely, but only if you have the right skills.
Right.
So it's not, you should only be fearful of things like AI and automation and robotics and, just add the list, 3D printing, whatever you want to add to that list of the future coming. If two things are true: one, your job is completely repetitive.
Yeah.
And two, you've decided not to adopt any of these new skills.
Right.
Because if you're unwilling to do those things, then yes, your job will likely be at risk. However, the way I like to talk about it is, think back to the days. So my mother at one point was a secretary. And that's what it was called back then. They didn't have these fancy names. She was a secretary, and she took shorthand. Something that, if you think people today don't understand cursive, try to understand shorthand. It's like hieroglyphics. Okay. The only thing I think that's remained as a remnant of shorthand is our little at in emails, right? That used to stand for the word at. And I guess it still does, IPC at org, but anyway, or .org at IPC.org. So she went from shorthand to typewriters, and that was fantastic. So she could type, 90 words a minute or whatever it was, something ridiculously much faster than I can type. And, you carriage return, you get the ding, et cetera. And then you got computers and then word processors. I think of AI and things like that are just the next evolution of tools that help us leverage and capture our creativity and benefit to the world economic situation. And even our personal situations. It's not just about benefiting business. We should end up as humans with more free time to use our creativity to think, to breathe. Now, I don't know that that's going to be true. I mean, I saw a report from, I think it was Alibaba, that said the future of work will be a 4-hour work week. We're never going to do that.
No,
I believe
Tim Ferriss would like us to believe that, but you had the book, right? 4-hour work week.
He had the book, but Alibaba also emphasized saying, well, with all these things, we won't have to work at all.
What would we do?
So yeah, we could all sit there and I will think great thoughts, and that's great. But we're doers. People are doers. It helps us stay healthy, helps us stay active. Hopefully, we're able to do higher level work. Right. Use our capabilities instead of me sitting here counting ones and zeros and figuring out hexadecimal on my own as I convert binary to hexadecimal, which I did as a middle schooler trying to write my own computer gaming systems and things like that, because there wasn't a tool for me. We will have these tools that simplify that and allow us to ask better questions, to create better works of art, of convenience, of everything that we might need or hope to need in the future.
Yeah, I mean, I love what you're saying. Like, electronics, like these things we use, they're tools. They're nothing more than tools. And we tend to ascribe a lot of intelligence to them. I mean, look, artificial intelligence, so we've got the word right in it. But in reality, it's being created by humans for humans. And it is a tool to help us. And I think that what you're saying is so incredibly important, that we need to understand how these tools relate to each other, how we as humans use them, utilize them, and maximize our time. I had a speaker who used to always say, like, AI is really about replacing work that's dull, dirty, or dangerous, right? That's where it can,
Which is the history of engineering and innovation since the beginning of time, right? You used to have to plant your own crops. Then hey, look, there's a cow that can pull the plow. Isn't that, or a horse that can pull the plow? Yeah, we keep doing that, and we're just finding new ways to do that.
And so when we look at electronics in that way, again, because I keep coming back to that, because we are talking about electronics as a powerful resource. And so, the word itself has fallen out of use in our in our vocabulary often because we've had, suddenly it's AI or suddenly it's quantum computing or suddenly it's cell phones but these are really at their base, they're electronics. That's all they are. They're
Yeah, I mean,
form
when you think of electronics, if I were to just try to capture it for people who maybe are less familiar, I know we have a very wide variety of experience with this audience. So electronics, if you think of as a global term, right?
right.
And then there's subsectors. So we've heard a lot about the semiconductor industry. That's a subsector of electronics, right? Think of it as the brain or the engine of a car, okay? You really need that, and it needs to be really powerful. But if the engine's just sitting there and it doesn't have wheels, a drivetrain, an electronic system, windows, et cetera, it's not going anywhere. And so the other subsystems include things like the assembly process, the actual board that the things are built on, the passive components, materials, the equipment that's used to put it together, et cetera. These are all subsectors of the larger global electronics industry.
So it's a an industry of in some ways it's a, I guess, maybe a horizontal industry of verticals.
It is, and that's why I like to refer to it as a resource,
Right.
because as you think about, you've got the automotive, segment or sector, you've got, aerospace, telecommunications, whatever it may be, maybe a dozen different sectors you go across. Electronics, I don't think of as one of those. It is a horizontal. It cuts across every single one because they all use electronics, just like it's a natural resource.
Hmm. And so, with that, I come back to the sustainability aspect of it and say, what are the things that we as consumers should be thinking about electronics in terms of how to actually utilize what we have better, be more sustainable? Is there something we should be doing, or is there something we should be demanding of the manufacturers out there? How can we be part of a solution?
So it's really, there's a whole ecosystem to this problem. Okay, there are the consumers that want the latest and greatest and the coolest stuff, right? And if as long as they're demanding that, the manufacturers are going to give it to them. That's the business. But there's also this whole system behind that has to work in order to have a good sustainable system. All right, so companies can't force that system to exist. Individual consumers also struggle, to do that, but they can demand it of their governments. Governments have been paying good attention to, and rightfully so, some aspects of electronics. They're starting to pay more attention, especially in Europe, to sustainability. And you're seeing a little bit picking up in North America as well. Asia's responding to those requests. But what we really need is the governments have to pay attention to the systems that allow electronics and other pieces to be managed correctly within there. Right now, they're ad hoc at best, as I mentioned earlier. They're really not well known. Just like we talked about having a standard connector for the iPhone, if we had a standard place that we brought in to have a screen replaced or to have a processor replaced or something like that, and this is the connector that would work internally for that, and this is what the system would take, say, that chip or that memory piece out, and it would be utilized in a lower end device that could be still, it's still functional. It's not like it broke most of the time. And so having those types of things agreed upon globally is the challenge. We're getting there, but we're going to get there slowly. This is not a 3 to 5 month problem. This is I hope it's faster. If I'm looking at the current trajectory and I don't take into account, exponential change, which is happening all around us. But if I look at the current, it's 20 to 30 years away before we get to a real system like that. And so there has to be some real effort and change if we're going to accelerate that process.
And what I think is so profound about that is, we just said, look, 30 years ago, the iPhone was introduced the cell phone was introduced into the world. And today we are, so in the time
today we're talking to it, we don't even have to touch it. And it will tell us anything we want to know. So that vast difference apply to, recycling or to reuse or to reclaiming. And it's not there.
It's not there. And it's going to take us that long again to fix it. And that's
hopefully
where it's
not, but yes,
hopefully not, and I think, look, we are in times of of really, really impactful change right now. We both know we're seeing half the world go to the polls this year. And I know that right now you happen to be sitting in the US, even though you're a global organization, you happen to be in the US, and it's in the middle
I
of
am
a
today.
yeah, and it's in the middle of a pretty, tight race for its leaders, and
There's an election going on in the US?
and that's happening not just in the US, it's happening many
Right.
places.
You're right.
And so when we look at the world as a whole, what are the, if I look at that and go, okay, well, who's the one that's sort of, whether it be the UN or the World Economic Forum, these are sort of the global leaders in our world. Like if you were to have a spot on a stage at the UN or the World Economic Forum as the leader of one of the most, impactful and powerful organizations in the world, quite frankly, what would you say to them? What is the message you want heard that we can take away and support you on and help make those changes so it's not 30 years?
So it's about pulling together the right groups of complementary areas. So there will be businesses that will be engaged in setting up and delivering those systems. There are businesses engaged in creating electronics, and there are governments that are engaged in making sure that the right rules and guidelines are set up to make sure those systems work. We need to pull those key players. It doesn't have to be everybody. You really just need probably the right 20 from each of those groups,
Right.
maybe even the right 10 from each of those groups to get it started. I mean, we at IPC have this a standards process. We don't create the standards, the industry creates it. But we utilize a technique called the A teams, right? So we pull together maybe a dozen of the right people to do the first pass. They huddle, they do really intensive work for maybe a week or so, and they put something out there that then people can critique and give feedback on. And it accelerates this process very, very speedily. Whereas, some other processes might take years. And in the electronics world, a standard that comes out 5 years after you've started it is not worth very much because, as we said, things are changing way too fast.
Yeah.
But similarly, we could use a similar process like that many organizations use to get an accelerant going, have a few of the right people together, convene them, meet 4 times a year, just make this a priority. I feel like it's been an interesting note. Everybody's, yes, we need to save the planet. That's important.
Yeah, of course.
It's a good thing. But, we don't actually have, there's not fire coming out of my door because of it. And so
Right.
there are a lot of fires that people are putting out. Thankfully, most of the organizations I know have sustainability efforts underway that they could say, hey, we want to assign you to this UN effort or World Economic Forum or whatever the right group is to solve that problem. We happen to have an electronics sustainability leadership council where we pull from all over the world leaders in electronics to help guide IPC's efforts on some of those problems, but they're not going to be able to solve the ecosystem issues. You really need to pull industry with governments together for that.
And I think that's a really powerful message, right? Because the reality, as you said, it is a resource. Electronics, truthfully, are a resource that goes across everything we do and everything we use. And the reality is without that kind of coordinated effort, we're going to be on a back foot. And in fact, we can't become sustainable because there's too many players in it. And so I love what you're saying, which is we need to create a community of powerful, impactful organizations who actually come together to create change first within themselves and then create that sort of the ripples across the industry, but more importantly, around the world.
That's right.
Yeah, and that is powerful. I mean, look, if there's anyone from the World Economic Forum or the UN listening, I would say you need
Give me
John
a call.
on your stage, because the reality is we absolutely need to start thinking about this. Electronics is so ubiquitous and it is so pervasive in our everyday, and it is only going to get more. And unless we start thinking sustainability globally and having those agreements, we're going to be in a not so great place in 20 years if we don't start doing it now. So John,
It
this
is,
has been, yeah.
just as a closing comment, it is possible to make that change much faster, but we
And
have
that,
to all agree to want to do it.
and I was going to throw it to you and say, as we wrap up, because look, I could talk to you all day about this, but I know that we've only got limited time and you're busy. So what would you like to leave our listeners with as they sort of digest this really rich conversation that we've just had?
So let me just summarize it then. You started off saying, electronics, do we even care about that? Absolutely. They make everything you're doing possible today. Software and semiconductors are great and they're part of that, but without the electronics, you got nothing. Secondly, as we work towards sustainability, it needs to be a collaborative effort. We need to get governments and key industry players working together to create an ecosystem that can design new electronics into. And until we have that, it's going to be ad hoc at best.
Thank you. It's powerful. And for anyone out there who is in the electronics industry, I think everything that John has said here will probably resonate with you. And if you haven't thought about electronics recently, you might want to start looking at the things around you and realize that we are governed by them. And so maybe we should start governing them. John, thank you. This has been incredibly powerful and enlightening. And as always, your answers are so clear. Thank you so much for being with me today.
Thanks, Andrea.
And thank you to all of you who joined us. Hopefully, you've gotten something new from our conversation. And make sure you check back here in a couple of weeks. We're doing another conversation with thought leaders with another amazing woman, Janet Olmstead, who is an expert in play. And if you want to find out how you can incorporate more play into your day and why that's important, then join us in a couple of weeks right here on Conversations with Thought Leaders. Thank you so much again.